I was a traitor to rock and roll. I must admit that part of that song I did borrow from a big Brazilian hit. They thought I had left rock and roll because I recorded a disco song.
Rod Stewart was never a born genius destined to shine. He is the product of insecurity, failure, sex, a voice as raspy as a half-burnt cigarette, and a string of wrong loves, rushed marriages, abandonments, reconciliations, and breakups. In the world of pop rock, where polish and refinement are celebrated, he arrived like an accidental brushstroke, but one no one could erase. With his spiky blonde hair, flashy suits, and cocky strut, he didn't just step onto the stage, he stormed it. From the shy youngest son of a working-class Scottish family to the man who once abandoned his newborn daughter, was rumored to have had his stomach pumped after a scandal with sailors and nearly lost his voice to cancer. Rod Stewart didn't glide through life as a perfect gentleman. He lived fast, loved hard, made mistakes, and then wrote love songs that made the world cry with him. People mocked him for "Da Ya Think I'm Sexy?" then wept when he sang Sailing. They called him a sellout, a money chaser, a womanizing crooner, but still lined up for tickets every time he toured. And now, in 2025, as he turns 80, still wearing red velvet jackets, white shoes, and grinning like a boy on his way to a first date, Rod Stewart can still make crowds scream, not because he's perfect, but because he's real. How did a raspy-voiced, scandal-prone, hopeless romantic survive 6 decades at the top and become the love song rogue the whole world forgave? Join Rock Discovery as we trace that journey, where Rod Stewart isn't just singing, but living like an unfinished ballad, never entirely right, yet impossible to stop listening to. Early life. Rod Stewart was born on January 10, 1945 in Highgate, North London, at a time when Britain was still reeling from the chaos of war. The youngest of 5 children in a Scottish family, Rod grew up in a quiet tension. He was doted on, yet weighed down by heavy expectations. His father, Robert Stewart, a strict lathe operator and newsstand owner, dreamed of raising sons who were model men, disciplined, athletic, composed. But Rod was different. He was always the odd one out. From an early age, Rod lived in the shadows of his older brothers, men who joined the military, held stable jobs, or became semi-pro athletes. The family even built a mini football pitch in the backyard, pouring their hopes into the youngest becoming a professional player. And Rod almost did. He joined Brentford FC's youth team, received trial invites from major clubs. But what he never dared tell his father was he didn't love football. At least not as much as he loved something else, music. That was the first secret he kept, and the root of a shame that would haunt him for decades. Because in a household where masculinity meant sports, Rod Stewart, with his love of singing, flashy clothes, painting, and black soul music, was seen as a misfit, a half-finished boy. He was skinny, hook-nosed, sandy-haired, deeply insecure about his looks, a poor student, labeled lazy by teachers. At school, he was often teased, called names like Nancy Boy and Girl in Disguise for the way he dressed and the sound of his voice. After dropping out of an art course, Rod scraped by doing odd jobs, grave digging, street vending, sketching portraits in Leicester Square, but nothing stuck for long. That was the phase where he wandered across England with a guitar in hand, performing in train stations, parks, pubs, even subway cars. He had no money, no plan. But he had one thing no one could take from him: a voice as hoarse as smoldering coal, a strange weapon he hadn't yet understood the full power of. To his family, he was a failure. To Rod, it was the first time he felt free. And then one night at Twickenham Station, just after wrapping up a makeshift performance for a few coins, a man approached him and said, "Your voice sounds like gravel in a throat, but I like it." That man was Long John Baldry, a prominent blues artist at the time, who became the first to pull Rod Stewart off the pavement and onto the path of professional music. To his parents, Rod was still the unruly youngest, but to himself, He had just placed a bet, not to win, but to avoid being swallowed by a life he never belonged to. Early career. Rod Stewart didn't enter music as a groomed star. He came into the scene like a stray who had stumbled upon a cave to scream in, instinctive, raw, and completely untrained. From 1963 to 1966, he performed with a string of small-time bands like the Ray Davies Quartet, which later evolved into the Kinks, the Hoochie Coochie Men, and Steam Packet, a group considered a precursor to British soul rock. But despite appearing on numerous stages, he remained the backup lead, a voice that stood out but hadn't yet found how to ignite. The breakthrough came when he met Jeff Beck, the guitar virtuoso known for his razor-sharp, fearless style. Jeff invited Rod to be the lead vocalist for the Jeff Beck Group in 1967. And for the first time, Rod's gritty, streetwise rasp collided with searing electric riffs, creating a brand of heavy blues rock that was raw, aggressive, and magnetic. The band's two albums, Truth, 1968, and Beck Ola, 1969, were hailed by critics as early blueprints of hard rock and heavy metal. Rod wasn't just singing, he was howling tales of the working class, of crushed hearts, of love that wasn't romantic but raw like pavement. American critics dubbed him a white man who sings like a black man after an all-night bender. The band wasn't a commercial juggernaut, but Rod's voice started gaining recognition as something unmistakable. However, the partnership with Jeff Beck didn't last. Artistic clashes, and both men's fiery tempers, led to the group's breakup. In 1969, Rod pivoted to join Faces, alongside Ronnie Wood, who would later become a member of the Rolling Stones. Faces embodied the spirit of British drunken rock, loose, half-joking lyrics, rowdy music, and performances that felt more like a party spiraling out of control. Rod was the center of it all, hair spiked, pants flamboyant, swaggering on stage like a man who just fell off a bar stool. Fans didn't love him for polish. They loved him for attitude. With Faces, he released tracks like Stay With Me and Cindy Incidentally, becoming the poster child of a lifestyle that was free to the point of reckless. But just as Faces were hitting their stride, Rod Stewart took a turn of his own. His solo album, Every Picture Tells a Story, 1971, featuring the smash hit Maggie May, catapulted him to stardom overnight. Both the UK and US were enchanted, not just by the folk rock melody, but by the way Rod told the story of a young man abandoned by an older woman. Not bitter, not self-pitying, just singing as if laughing through tears. That was when the world realized Rod wasn't just a frontman or a glittery rock persona. He was an artist, and he had finally found his voice. But that also meant Faces were no longer his priority, and Rod, once again, was seen by bandmates as the traitor. Still, he knew, if he didn't move forward, he'd always be someone else's shadow. Rod Stewart's solo career began like this, with betrayal, a sad love song, and a voice no one had ever taught him how to use. Career breakthrough. When Maggie May topped both the UK and US charts in 1971, Rod Stewart didn't just become an international star, he became a phenomenon. But what set him apart from his contemporaries wasn't vocal technique or stage image. It was his ability to turn mistakes, lust, and ill-timed romance into songs that pierced millions of hearts. Throughout the 1970s, Rod Stewart released a string of albums deeply marked by his personality. Never a Dull Moment, 1972, Smiler, 1974, Atlantic Crossing, 1975, A Night on the Town, 1976, and most notably, Blondes Have More Fun, 1978, where he completely reinvented himself, shifting from folk rock to provocative disco and pop. The hit, "Da Ya Think I'm Sexy," stunned Britain. Critics slammed Rod as a rock traitor chasing trends, but fans didn't care. The song shot to #1. won on the Billboard Hot 100, and became one of the defining disco-pop anthems of the decade. And Rod? He just grinned and replied with classic Stewart swagger. If singing sexy is wrong, I don't want to be right. Throughout the 80s, he remained on top with a series of hits. Young Turks, a synth-pop narrative about two lovers running away. Baby Jane, New Wave with Edge. Some Guys Have All the Luck, and Infatuation, blending funk, soul, and disco. He never feared changing genres, never clung to rock credibility, because for Rod, music wasn't a rigid doctrine. It was a mirror of his own life, defiant, complicated, full of desire and soaked in romance. But Rod wasn't just a flirt on vinyl. He knew when to slow down. Ballads like Sailing, I Don't Want to Talk About It, and Have I Told You Lately became staples of weddings, breakups, and late nights with no messages on the phone. That raspy voice, seemingly born for bar rooms, turned out to be perfectly suited for whispering into hearts. The 1990s saw Rod slow down as grunge and hip-hop took over. But instead of fading out, he stepped back, then returned in 2002 with a surprise: the Great American Songbook series. No more strutting, no more leather pants. He chose classic jazz standards, swing, and American pop from the 40s to the 60s, sung with maturity and grace. Critics sneered, but audiences embraced him. The albums all hit the top 10, selling tens of millions worldwide. In a pop landscape saturated with auto-tune and image, Rod Stewart brought listeners back to classic elegance, with a voice etched by every crack time had given it. In 2016, Rod Stewart was knighted by the British royal family, not just for music, but for decades of charity work. It wasn't the end, it was a quiet milestone. The man once dismissed as rock's leftover now stood as Sir Rod Stewart, with a respect no one could deny. He once said, "I was never the best singer, but I was the most real." And that's why, from Maggie May to Tonight's the Night, from disco to ballads, audiences are still singing along with Rod more than half a century on. Scandals and rumors. Rod Stewart was never a model of convention. He was the kind of artist who didn't enter the music industry to become an icon, but to live truthfully with his desires, even if that meant making mistakes along the way. And because of that, his life has always walked hand in hand with scandal, turmoil, and persistent rumors that refused to fade. Among the most notorious was a vicious rumor that haunted him throughout the 1970s. The fabricated story that he had been hospitalized for a stomach-pumping procedure following a same-sex sexual encounter. Rod publicly denied the claim and later revealed he believed it had been spread by a former manager out of revenge. But the truth didn't kill the lie. It became a senseless stain he had to carry for years, not because he believed it, but because the world wouldn't let it go. His love life was no less turbulent. With his romantic image and a voice that had a strangely irresistible pull, Rod moved through a string of high-profile relationships and left more than a few fractures behind. He fathered 8 children with 5 different women, including a daughter he and his teenage girlfriend gave up for adoption. It wasn't until she was an adult that Rod sought her out, resulting in a late, tearful reunion steeped in remorse. 2 failed marriages, millions spent in divorce settlements, and numerous admissions that he was good at little else but loving and hurting women. In 2000, the biggest blow didn't come from tabloids, but from medicine: thyroid cancer. After surgery, Rod lost his voice completely and had to relearn how to sing from scratch. Gone were the roaring bar nights and spellbinding screams. Only a 55-year-old man remained, standing before a mirror, struggling to produce a sound his throat no longer remembered. He also frequently found himself in trouble due to his outspoken nature. During a 2017 concert, Rod was criticized for jokingly mimicking a terrorist-style execution scene, a misstep that led to a public apology. He's also had numerous spats with fellow artists like Elton John, Freddie Mercury, and even his old Faces bandmates, fueling media firestorms with careless comments. But he never pretended to be anyone else. That's Rod, fiery, defiant, unapologetically honest, and sometimes forced to apologize because of it. Rod Stewart never hides his scars. He lets them live in his songs, in the wrinkles on his face, in the headlines that once tried to drag him down. And somehow that honesty makes him feel more human, not perfect, but never fake. A man willing to sing his mistakes aloud and make us believe that maybe the greatest love songs are the ones written from things left unfinished. Personal life. For Rod Stewart, love was never something to be understood, only felt. And that's how he lived his life, falling fast, staying drunk on romance, breaking apart, and starting over. His relationships never followed the rules. Sometimes they were impulsive infatuations, sometimes possessive instincts, and sometimes just loneliness dressed up as passion. But if one word could describe Rod Stewart's personal life, it would be plenty. Plenty of women, plenty of emotion, plenty of missteps, and plenty of children. Rod married 3 times and fathered 8 children, each from a different chapter of his life. With his first wife, Alana Hamilton, he had 2 children, Kimberly and Sean. Both grew up under the spotlight, carrying the Stewart name like a glamorous badge, but one that came with pressure. After a loud public divorce, Rod fell in love again and married famed model Rachel Hunter, 24 years his junior. They were once the most sought-after couple in Britain, a media sensation with their contrasting angel and devil beauty. But that marriage, too, ended in 2006, leaving Rod with 2 more children and 1 more heartbreak tucked behind the microphone. The deepest wound wasn't the divorces. It was having abandoned his first daughter, Sarah, when he was just a young man. The result of a youthful relationship, Sarah was given up for adoption in silence. Nearly 30 years later, Rod found her again, not as a father, but as someone who had missed too much to claim that title. When he reunited with Sarah, he didn't cry. But during a performance of The First Cut is the Deepest, shortly afterward, the audience noticed his eyes turning red. And yet what's remarkable about Rod is that he never lost faith in love. Though hurt, and though he hurt others, he kept loving, without hesitation, without calculation. In the end, he found peace with Penny Lancaster, the woman who stood by him since 1999, married him in 2007, and remains Rod's final home. Penny wasn't a fiery supermodel, nor a tabloid sensation, but she was the one who finally slowed him down. Walks in the garden, time with the kids, quiet mornings, and most of all, apologies. Together they have 2 sons, and Rod, at an age when many have retired, learned how to be a father all over again. No longer the absent dad, no longer the man who mailed child support and disappeared. Rod plays with his boys, takes them to school, teaches them football, and sometimes just sits silently listening as they talk about TikTok he doesn't understand. "I was a terrible father," he once said. "So now I'm trying not to repeat that again." Rod Stewart's personal life was never smooth. It was like his voice, sometimes smooth, sometimes cracking, sometimes choked with emotion, sometimes wild and free. But it's those rough edges that made him the kind of man you might love or hate, but could never ignore. Because behind the spotlight and the flashy suits is a heart that once loved clumsily, and is now learning to love again, more gently. Legacy and influence. Rod Stewart didn't change the music world by way of revolution. He didn't invent a genre, didn't lead a technological wave, and wasn't a protest icon like Dylan or Lennon. But he did something far rarer. He turned himself, with all his contradictions, wounds, and instinctive passions, into a language the whole world could hear, understand, and feel. Over more than 6 decades, Rod has sold over 120 million records. Not a number for bragging rights, but proof of the staying power of a voice that, on the surface, had nothing going for it but rasp. Yet it was that rasp, that sandpaper-soft crackle, that made people believe every word he sang. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Not polished, but deeply felt. He is one of the very few artists inducted twice into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, once as a solo act, 1994, and again as a member of Faces, 2012. But those honors only scratch the surface. The deeper truth lies in how he expanded the boundaries of music, from blues, soul, and rock to disco, pop, and even classic jazz. Rod never swore loyalty to a single genre. He swore loyalty to emotion. What drew people to him wasn't the musical style. It was how he told a story in a song. Whether it was a one-night affair, a late apology, or loneliness dressed in the final violin notes of a ballad, it always felt like Rod had lived it. He also became an unconventional but powerful influence on later generations of singers. Bryan Adams, John Bon Jovi, Kelly Jones, Stereophonics, Gavin Rossdale, Bush, and even Harry Styles have cited Rod as a major inspiration for teaching them how to sing with heart, not technique. From him, they learned authenticity, grit, and the belief that an ordinary person could still make something extraordinary if they lived truthfully. Beyond music, Rod left his mark in philanthropy, particularly in cancer awareness, children's welfare, and veteran support. After surviving thyroid cancer himself, he actively raised funds and helped build psychological support centers for patients. In 2016, he was knighted, Knight Bachelor, not just for his artistic contributions, but for his quiet, tireless devotion to the community. Rod Stewart never set out to become a symbol, but through imperfection, through falling and rising again, he became part of cultural memory, where every one of his songs is tied to a moment, a breakup, a stolen kiss, a midnight car ride. And in an age where everything can be faked, Rod's voice still carries a rough, stubborn honesty. His legacy doesn't live in museums or monuments. It lives in every whispered chorus of Sailing, in the tears shed when I Don't Want to Talk About It plays at a wedding, and in the way the world, no matter how often it criticized him, always came back to listen. Because Rod Stewart was never the most polished storyteller. He was simply the one you believed when he sang about what the heart had been through. Life today. In 2025, Rod Stewart turns 80. For many, it's the time to retire, step away from the stage, savor long afternoons with family, tea, and memoir drafts. But not Rod. He's still performing. Still stepping onto the stage in glittering suits, gleaming white shoes, and with the grin of a boy who never really grew up. Not because he needs the money, not to cling to the spotlight, simply because he doesn't know how to live without singing. In recent years, his schedule has slowed, but never stopped. He just wrapped up the One Last Time tour across Europe, where each show felt like a half-spoken farewell, drawing both tears and laughter from the crowd. At Glastonbury Festival 2025, he appeared in astonishing form, back still straight, voice still raspy but strong, and legs, though no longer dancing like they used to, still capable of making the whole stage move. No pyrotechnics, no backup dancers, just Rod and Maggie May, and a sea of people standing still, singing along as if time had vanished. Outside of music, Rod now spends more time with family. He splits his life between two homes, one in Essex, UK, and one in Palm Beach, USA, together with Penny Lancaster and their two young sons. On Penny's social media, he often appears in moments that feel disarmingly ordinary. Walking the dog, fixing garden lights, watching his sons play football or playing piano under the backyard sun. A different Rod, no stage, no velvet jackets, but still with that boyish twinkle in his eyes. He also maintains close ties with his older children, despite the distance of the past. They gather on holidays, share stages, and occasionally perform together at charity events. For Rod, this is the part of life he once missed, and now he's reclaiming it piece by piece with affection that's quiet but strikingly sincere. His health remains relatively stable. Despite past battles with cancer and vocal cord issues, he stays active, eats well, and, true to form, hasn't given up wine. "I just drink less," he laughs, "because I want to keep singing a few more years." When asked about retirement, he simply smiles. "I'll stop when I stop loving it, music, the stage, and the audience." In a world that keeps moving faster, Rod Stewart has chosen to slow down, not to stop, but to savor. The wild years are behind him. No more sleepless tours, no more parties blurred by wine and strangers. These days, he sings less, but sings with his whole life. Each song now isn't just a performance. It's a whispered thank you to life for letting him survive and live truthfully. Rod Stewart no longer needs standing ovations, chart positions, or proof of anything. He's gone far enough, loved deep enough, stumbled hard enough, and still stands tall. In that raspy voice now lives a man who's no longer running from anything. No regrets, no grand gestures, just Rod. Still defiant, still warm, and still singing until the final song fades into silence. Rod Stewart was never the greatest voice of his era. He wasn't a musical innovator nor a cultural prophet with a grand mission, but among the countless names that once burned bright and then faded, he stayed. Resilient, instinctive, and so honest, it could sometimes make you uncomfortable. And perhaps that's exactly what made him a legend, a man who never pretended to be anything else. From the sidewalks of London to the Glastonbury stage, from love songs scribbled for one-night stands to choked-up verses for a daughter once left behind, from wild bar nights to quiet mornings in a home filled with laughter, Rod Stewart has walked through every shade of an artist's life. He's stumbled, been misunderstood, hurt others, and battled himself. But he's also never run away from who he is. Mistakes? Yes. Regrets? Plenty. But fake? Never. Rod Stewart's greatest legacy isn't in platinum records or prestigious awards, but in the way he allowed millions to see themselves in songs that seemed deeply personal. He didn't lead revolutions or promise salvation, but through music, he knew how to place a hand on the listener's shoulder and quietly say, "I've been there too, and I survived." If you've ever loved someone at the wrong time, ever made mistakes you couldn't undo, ever wandered through lost years while still clinging to a dream, maybe you'll understand why the world still needs Rod Stewart. And if you've ever shouted Maggie May into the night when you felt directionless, or sat in stillness with sailing during a storm inside your heart, share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Rock Discovery as we continue exploring the souls that endure, those who never needed to be perfect to silence the world.